So today I am going to show you how to fabricate the braided wedding ring. So here we go, this is a sample here. So a braid down the middle, two side bands. So this is our core. For today I'm going to use a flat braid. So this is what we're going to put down the middle. And then this is some 1.2 square wire that we'll use for around the edge. So first thing we need to do is make the core. Actually, the first thing we do is the braid first. We need to know what the braid is because the core has to be as wide as the braid plus two of the sides so that the sides can hold it. So I'm not, this is just for stock, so I'm not going to make any particular size. So I'm not too worried about the size of it yet. And I'm just going to zoom in here for you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make just a band ring. Now, Pepe Tools has a really nice bender, which I've been using at the college where I teach, and I quite like it. I don't have one, so I'm going to be using these little vinyl pliers. You can get these all over the places, not places. Just make sure that you bend that end nice and curved. And this is a bit wider than I will be needing, but wider is better than narrower because I can always trim some down if I get down to it. So this is quite large, so I'm gonna shrink it down a bit. And I'm just going to do that manually for now because, again, this is just for stock, so I don't need to really worry about the size of it. But I do want to make it, you know, guy size 12. You know what? I'm actually going to make it fairly large because I don't make a lot of large rings. So once I have this, I'm going to make sure that it's paralleled up so you can see how it's sticking over the edge here. I'm going to actually bend that so it's flush so that it sits flat when I'm working on it. And that's just going to make it a little bit easier for the next steps. So I'm going to cut it just like a jump ring. Again, because I'm not worrying about size, I'm not too overly worried about. Now this piece that I'm making for this particular piece is 0.8 millimeters, but it could be up to 1 millimeter thick. And we're just gonna trim it down a little bit here so that this is overlapping. I got a little nick in it from when I cut it, which is fine, because I am gonna trim it down anyways. So now I'm just gonna cut it along that. So if you're doing this for a customer, you would obviously make it to fit that particular person, but this is just for a sample and for a showcase, so not too concerned about it. I like to try to keep this as round as possible. I do not like when people flatten those out. It changes the dimensions, the exterior circumference of the solder joint, and it actually makes it more likely to snap when you're putting it together. So I've always found that it's just better to make it fit. So now you can see when I squeeze this together, the two lines aren't quite matched up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to squeeze it together. I'm going to run my saw blade down the joint. And what that'll do is it'll give me a nice tight solder joint. Now, unfortunately, can't find my half round pliers, but in this case it doesn't matter too much because it's a big ring. So again, we just want to make sure that that's nice and tight when we go to solder it. And I'm just bending it back and forth and sliding it underneath itself so that when it snaps together, it holds the solder joint nice and tightly. Unfortunately, I think one of my students borrowed my other pliers, which is super annoying, but... And then we'll just get this guy nice and lined up here. And almost there. When I hold it, it's pretty tight. I just need it to stay tight while I'm soldering it. And I want to make sure that it doesn't stick up. So right now, this side here isn't quite in line with this side. So I'm just going to hold it here, give it a little bit of a bend down until that lines up just right. And I do switch back and forth from side to side. We just want to make sure that that does not stick up and give us a better solder joint. There we go, that's pretty good. So while I'm, what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder this right now. And I'm going to use hard solder. I can find my hard solder here. Here we go. Found the pliers I was looking for at the same time. So I'm going to be fairly generous with my hard solder. And even though I brought my soldering area over to my workbench, I do not have I unfortunately don't have the rest of my soldering stuff. Here we go. So get my torch lit. I'm just going to dip my ring in, I use methyl hydrate and boracic acid to, it's just a reduced fire scale. There we go. Now in this case, I'm just going to put it on these two pieces here, expose the solder joint, grab my solder pick if I can find it. Here we go. Flux. Make sure that the entire solder joint is covered with flux. And I use self-pickling flux. I find it works pretty well. And I'm going to grab my solder. Again, I'm using hard solder. I'm going to warm it up. I'm going to put it on this edge right here. I'm just going to heat it up until that little ball of solder gets sucked down in between the joint. There it goes. And I'm actually going to make sure that it flows all the way through. So I'm going to turn it over and draw it upwards. It should have done it, but there we go, just to make sure. So now that that's done, I'm just going to let it cool. Okay, so I've just pickled this. And although it needs a little bit more time in the pickle, it's fine for the moment. So what we need to do now is first we need to make sure that this is round. So it looks like it's probably 12.5. Now that we have this round, we know that we need enough of this to fit around it, but actually before we do that, I am going to make some side bands for it. So this is 1¼ millimeter square wire, and I just need enough to go around this twice. So I'm going to use these guys here, and it's going to get me a good start of a coil. Now, instead of bending it around kind of like you would normally do it, using these actually helps keep this from twisting a little bit. If you don't have these, you can just flatten it out. Again, I'm going around twice so that I can make 2 side bands at once. And then I just need to open it up to fit into this. And I'm going to go a little bit of extra depth here. And then I'm going to open this up so that the bands, side bands, slide over the whole thing. So now I have this. It's going to be nice and tight on there, which is good. I'm just going to use my scriber, line this all up, and I should be able to cut it right there. And I'm going to cut this second one just a little bit longer, and then we can pull this out. Maybe that over there. And I'm just going to find those little lines. I'm going to start, make my life a little bit easier. Here's my line on this one. I'm just going to cut it a little bit long. That way I don't have the great big thing rolling around. I'm just going to put this on my bench. You can see my line is right here. I'm going to cut it a bit long, and that's so that I can have, the way I ran my saw frame down, saw down the other piece, it'll be just a little bit easier. What I'm going to do is I'm holding it with my pliers so that this crotch doesn't let me cut into that other wire. So this wire is beyond the joint. That's just so I don't accidentally nick that other wire. And then we find the other line, which is right here. And we just do the same thing. There we go. Now I have 2 rings. I'm just going to slide it on there to make sure that they're going to fit. That looks good. Let's check the second one. Should be fine. I'm going to line them up and solder them. Again, I'm just going to use these pliers so that I can hold them. Try to get some of this. The square wire often twists when you're using it. Again, I like this to be parallel as possible right here. A lot of people will do a D shape right here. I personally don't like that. I find it puts a lot of stress on the outside portion of the ring.